No, there, okay. Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm Noni Estrada, Program Management Officer at UNRIS, the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, and it's an honor to facilitate this working group on building on synergies outside the UNFCCC process. Well, as you know, this session is dedicated to that topic, and that is a topic that opens space to explore how just transition pathways are being shaped from different entry points. And this dialogue invites us to step outside institutional silos and explore how adaptation and just transitions are being advanced on the ground, across systems, and beyond in the formal negotiations. We have this question. Okay, we have a technical problem, but I will read it anyway. In the context of adaptation and climate resilience, how can the Just Transition Working Program, including through its dialogues, explore synergies with initiatives outside the UNFCCC processes, avoiding duplications and including all relevant voices? We will go around for short contributions. Feel free to share what you think it could be relevant from your setting, practice, or institutional experience. And remember, as Camila from ILO told us, the work of building just transitions doesn't start from scratch, and it builds on what many actors have been doing for years, sometimes outside the main negotiation space. So we open the floor for your participation, and this is a space for sharing your thoughts. Who wants to start? Are there any examples you wanted to share or thoughts about Australia?
I just wanted to ask if we could see the question on the screen.
We'll wait then to the...
Okay.
We have some technical problems, but it will be... I will read it again anyway. In the context of adaptation and climate resilience, how can the program, including through its dialogues, explore synergies with initiatives outside the UNFCCC processes, avoiding duplications and including all relevant voices? Yes. Please introduce yourself first.
Karen Hedeman, Dominican Republic. The Just Transition Work Program can also generate meaningful impact by connecting with initiatives beyond the UNFCCC framework, such as the 2030 Agenda, the Sendai Framework, and the UN System efforts, multilateral development banks, and regional platforms like SICA, or the Alliance of Small Island State agencies, including the diverse voice, local governments, civil society, academia, and the private sector, enhancing inclusivity and align cross-cutting agendas for greater impacts, efficiency, and legitimacy. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Do we have someone on the online? Yes, please. Saudi Arabia.
Hi, hello. I'm Abdurrahman Al-Muteri. Thank you, Dominican Republic, for breaking the ice, I guess. I'll take it from there. For us, we believe that the Just Transition Work Program, including its dialogues, can explore synergies outside the UNFCCC without compromising the integrity of the UNFCCC process by ensuring that all discussions remain rooted in the nationally determined context of just transitions. Engagement with external initiatives should be limited to knowledge exchange, particularly as it relates to domestic challenges and implementation perspectives. The Just Transition Work Program should not be shaped or driven by external actors or frameworks. Instead, it should prioritize engagement with each party to reflect the diversity of national just transition pathways and the challenges each party faces in advancing adaptation and resilience. This may benefit from domestic perspectives of parties. The dialogue can help surface these differences and provide space for parties to share how just transitions are implemented in their own context. This reinforces the bottom-up party-driven nature of the work program and avoids any attempt to impose a top-down, externally influenced narrative in the UNFCCC level. In doing so, the Just Transition Work Program will remain focused, relevant, and responsive to the needs of parties, supporting nationally led efforts without duplicating existing work or allowing outside agendas to shape the outcome under the convention. I think I'll give it.
Thank you very much. Floor is open for new contributions. Yes, the Women and Gender constituency, please.
Thank you so much. I would like to bring two different spaces. One of them is the United Nations Secretary General Panel on Critical Energy Transition Minerals. So this panel of experts, what they do is that they do some research, they do some work as well framing common principles that allow or move us towards a just and equitable management of sustainable, responsible, and reliable value chain of those terrestrial energy transition minerals. So I think that their knowledge and what they have advanced in terms of defining how the different processes for obtaining these transitional minerals have to happen, no? Like how we can start getting some information from there and just not start from scratch. And in the same line, I would like as well to raise the work that different special rapporteurs have been doing. For example, the special rapporteur on a healthy, safe, and sustainable environment, and as well in the context of climate change. Both of them have been already having different consultations with civil society, with governments, kind of building and understanding, okay, which are those best practices, or where do we see that there can be some potential threats for causing harms in that transition. So the work that they have been doing is not only based on, let's say, an epistemological or like academic research, but they have been on the ground as well, visiting communities and kind of collecting this information. So I believe that as well, the information that the special rapporteurs provide widens also the scope. Well, not the scope of the Just Transition Work Program, don't understand me well, but like the understanding of the Just Transition. And in the same line, the Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner has been as well engaging in this topic. They come as well to the different COPs, to bonds, and they have been as well in a process of consultations, of understanding how just transition with a human rights approach is also centered in NDCs and so on. So there is already a lot of work that has been happening outside the UNFCCC that we cannot just disregard, rather understand how this expertise is more valuable for us so that we do not start from scratch when thinking about the core element of just transition, which is justice and equity.
Thank you very much. We are moving forward, and yes, please. I don't know if I'm here.
Yeah, thank you.
See 40 cities, yeah.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, and speaking on behalf of the local government municipality constituency as well. Just maybe a bit more informally, I think one of the things that's a reflection on this work on just transition is that there's been a lot of work on synergies on the mitigation side of the just transition on initiatives outside of the UNFCCC. So, you know, we as subnational entities have engaged in a number of sort of complementary initiatives that are looking at specifics of just transition. For example, the IEA is doing a lot of work on people-centered energy transitions that is actually complementary to the work that's happening under this work program on just transition. And I think maybe there is a bit more that needs to be done in terms of identifying what are those other adaptation and resilience initiatives that need a better mainstreaming of just transition into them, in which they can be complementary, because maybe the thinking on the mitigation side of just transition is much more advanced, and so these synergies are happening anyway, but maybe there actually needs to be a stronger signal coming from this program about what are the other elements that can be complementary, and what are the other initiatives that are out there, because I think, as we saw from the presentation earlier, I know that's it does exist under the UNFCCC, so it's slightly different to this, but there is a lot of synergies on the global goal in terms of the principles and how they align with just transition, but maybe those links aren't being made explicitly enough. So I guess it's more a question about how do we do that and how do we find those. Just maybe more specifically on the subnational side of things, we've been doing some work together with all of the partners under the local government and municipality constituency on the CHAMP initiative, which is around multi-level partnerships, so how subnational government can be involved in the new round of NDCs, both in terms of the work that's underway to review the NDCs ahead of the next COP, but also thinking about, when it comes to implementation, what is the role of subnationals? And that, to me, is a key sort of strategic opportunity on the adaptation, resilience, just transition nexus, but then also how you can maybe leverage that to empower subnationals as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Australia. And please, sorry? Oh, sorry. European Union then.
Thanks. No, thanks for the intervention also made by the non-party stakeholders that are interesting to hear other initiatives we are not especially thinking of. And I think that's an important point you just made, that we should identify what are the gaps also in the existing work outside, because we shouldn't just duplicate processes. So it's an important work, and I think we haven't maybe taken the time to do that enough in the Just Transition Work Program until now. We didn't have these kind of questions, if I remember correctly, in the previous dialogues. And I agree as well, when we were preparing as well for this dialogue, that maybe it's a bit less clear in terms of adaptation. There's a bit less knowledge on this, but at the same time, in a lot of ways, we see in the presentation also right now from ILO that there are lots of just transition elements that apply to both adaptation and mitigation, and that I'm not sure that it's that useful always to make that distinction. It's rather cross-cutting, and a lot of the just transition elements can actually improve the synergies between mitigation and adaptation action. So I think that's one of the point that we could further develop. But then we have looked at different initiatives, and there are lots outside. We know, of course, the ILO guidelines for just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all, and in there are these key principles or elements that can be applied in both mitigation and adaptation action. There's the UN Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions. The G20 Just Transition work streams, we know that South Africa is working on this, following also the G20 endorsed principles for just and inclusive energy transition, which could be potentially used as a basis for elaborating more comprehensive cross-sectoral voluntary principle or recommendation in an inclusive manner, involving all relevant stakeholders in the context of the Just Transition Work Program. And like there's also the G20 task force on mobilization against climate change, and that brings together the climate and finance community for the first time in a systematic manner. So look at what could be the synergies with those processes. Then I heard, I don't know, I think you mentioned, sorry, I forgot, the IEA Global Observatory on People-Centered Clean Energy Transition. There's the Just Energy Transition Partnerships that can provide some valuable lessons learned, and how can maybe the Just Transition Work Program try to improve those. The NDC partnership is also like a platform through which developing countries can get support to integrate just transitional elements into the NDC implementation plans. So yeah, maybe there are also links to be done there. There are many, and then you have more related to finance as well. The work done by MDBs. There was the high-level statement published by MDBs at the UNGA Climate Action Summit in 2019 already, and that provided some high-level principles to help guide the MDB support for just transition. There's also work done by the World Bank, the World Bank's Just Transition for All initiative. And we have talked about it, I believe, in other sessions as well, the Just Transition taxonomy. So these are some examples. It's not exhaustive, clearly, but yeah, that's where I think we need some work to be done, and making sure we are not duplicating these things.
Thank you very much, European Union. Let's go to Australia and then South Africa.
Thank you very much. I was reflecting on some reading last night and presentations this morning, and it just struck me really how much is underway on just transition. And these efforts outside the UNFCCC, they already play a critical role in shaping just transitions and delivering adaptation on the ground. For example, MDBs, including the World Bank and other development banks, embed just transition to their climate resilience projects, and we've heard how ILO promotes decent work in adaptation relevant sectors. And while institutions like IRENA and OECD focus on inclusive energy transitions and policy coherence, we have JT principles from G20, APEC, ILO, and the MDB Just Transition, high-level principles, just to name a few. And these aren't side conversations, and they shouldn't be dismissed, but they're central to the delivery of equitable adaptation. So rather than being driven by external actors, I think we should support ways for this work program to not only identify, but amplify some of these connections. And actors such as think tanks, Indigenous organisations, regional partnerships, they're already delivering locally led, socially equitable adaptation. And I think this work program should draw on these models, avoiding duplication, ensuring that adaptation supports fair, future-ready economies. We've also heard yesterday from many that there's no just transition without Indigenous people's knowledge, and this must be embedded in global adaptation practice, not tokenised but respected as foundational. I agree with my colleague from the EU on the cross-cutting nature of just transition, and adaptation and just transition will have the most impact when paired with ambitious mitigation. And of course, we know that adaptation is easier when 1.5 degrees is within reach. So I think the first step is a comprehensive stocktake of some of these efforts and to identify the gaps. And personally, I'm quite flexible as to how that occurs, but it really is a crucial step. This work program must stay connected to real-world efforts that deliver outcomes for people. And it should draw lessons from practical collaboration to ensure that local voices continue to shape this work. And working with institutions like the GCF and GEF and climate investment funds and promoting public-private partnerships will help mobilise resources to where they're needed most. I might leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Australia. And now we go to South Africa, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, colleagues. And I think From my end, just to echo some of the sentiments that have been shared in the room, but I was particularly encouraged by the reflections that we received from the ILO this morning. And I think what that reflected is that the silos it's insufficient, and we don't need to be working in silos, but rather seize this opportunity to build on the momentum that already exists around how we could frame and take a just transition discussion forward. And I think it's important to also make the point that a lot of the reflections around integrating our efforts and integrating our work is also relevant in this instance. And I mean, if one draws on, for example, looking at just transition pathways beyond just an energy sector, there's a lot of input or reflections from different entities where we've looked at, for example, just transitions in agriculture. I think yesterday there was a lot of reflection on transition pathways in agriculture and work that's being done, for example, around food systems. And these are all entities that are outside of the UNFCCC that we could be using to pull in and create synergies in taking the work forward. But I think importantly, it's important for us to reflect on then what is the strategic relevance that this work program could play in pooling all of these elements together, particularly to reflect, one, integrating equity and fairness in the work that we take forward, but in a manner that also facilitates transition pathways that are just and equitable. So I think it's important to just zoom in specifically on what the value proposition of this work program could be, specifically around pooling all of these efforts together and ensuring that we push the needle in terms of being transformative in our climate action in an equitable way. Thanks.
Thank you very much, South Africa. Do we have anything online? I cannot, yes. Yes, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. UNCTAD, please.
Thank you, Chair. To add to what a few others have already said, I want to maybe try and build some linkages with processes that at UNCTAD, in our view, are really connected. When we were talking yesterday a lot about planning and sequencing and holistic approaches, system-wide, whole of government. In UNCTAD's framework of thinking, or in our analysis, we understand that as a new generation of industrial policy, something that can bring together the mitigation, adaptation, developmental, job creation, environmental, bring together these different ambitions into the planning process. And industrial policy understood simply as public leadership in order to coordinate economies towards publicly defined common goals, which we can sort of agree is the kind of basis of the Paris Agreement and the commitments that have been made. So as has been mentioned by a few other folks, the G20 process under Brazil and continued under South Africa have seen some of these issues be raised in profile, particularly under Brazil's G20 task force Clima, where one of the recommendations from the expert report was for a global facility for industrial strategy coordination. And I think that is right now a gap in terms of, beyond the national level just transition efforts, is what is the global coordination around just transition, considering that no country acts as a silo. All economies are interdependent. We live in a globalized world. And so one country's just transition can have huge impacts on another country's and vice versa. They can amplify, they can negatively impact. So these sorts of transboundary elements, I think, it relates to that G20 work on industrial policy. And right now, the South African G20 is trying to develop a framework of principles on green industrialization, which I think is a sort of continuation of that work and something that just transition thinking can really benefit and can really make sure that we're taking that whole of economy approach to it. I think those different pillars of work on green industrialization in the G20 is also connected to the conversation on country platforms. Country platforms at their best are a way for countries to be able to deliver their national climate resilient development plans in a way that is whole of government and can also identify the right sources of finance that can invest in those plans and deliver them. And I think that we've seen maybe more versions of country platforms that we can take some lessons from that have not went so well, that maybe have not brought that whole of economy, the adaptation, the mitigation, that holistic approach to it. And I think bringing these together, the green industrialization lessons, the thinking around just transition and that framework of thinking, and the country platform's opportunity for countries to have these nationally rooted and determined plans that they can deliver and finance with the right sorts of financing. And that takes me to, colleagues have mentioned all of the plethora of just transition principles that have came from many different bodies, and something that this programme can do is to bring some coherence to that. I don't think that we want any institution to be able to just name something just transition without any scrutiny. And as a member-driven process with all member states involved, bringing some harmonisation of these different ad hoc efforts and being able to have further scrutiny and to give authority to what do we mean by just transition, I think is critical, both for member states trying to deliver their just transition plans, but also for civil society to hold institutions to account. I also mentioned financing around that green industrialisation and the country platforms. A process that's happening this year is, of course, financing for development. And while not explicitly about climate finance, it is a separate negotiation process. The outcomes from that process will have huge ramifications for the potential for member states and parties to be able to generate the sorts of financing that they need to be able to deliver just transitions, and yet maybe we've not seen that synergy between just transition and the financing for development process that we would need to be able to bring that coordinated, approach and to not work in these silos. And then another thing I want to mention is this link to the coordination facility that at the World Trade Organization, at UNCTAD, these bodies where we think about trade issues, there is a rising recognition of the need to think about climate and environment issues there. And I think that just transition lens is critical to bring there, and to bring these institutions closer together, identify which institutions should be leading which processes, where should some of these decisions be being made, which is the right body to be able to take forward certain agendas, and particularly thinking about trade in the context of a just transition. And then finally, I want to mention, because I work at UNCTAD, but I'm also a commissioner on the Scottish Just Transition Commission, which has done a lot of work on trying to bring together many different elements, including the adaptation element, into the National Just Transition Plan. And yet we really struggle on our commission to identify other countries who are trying to do this work too. And I think that there's something really important. It's interesting to us that our commission has never been contacted by the Just Transition Work Programme, despite being one of the more prominent just transition efforts nationally. And I think that we would like to see more bringing together these different national level efforts to be able to learn from one another, and also consider together how we can improve that advisory and scrutiny function to our respective governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Now we are going to the online participants, and we will listen to South Africa.
Thank you very much, and just want to say thank you in particular to UNCTAD for the recent intervention, and I'd like to build on that, particularly around the final point of bringing an advisory and scrutiny function. I think that there is a lot more that's happening outside of the UNFCCC, and the role of non-state actors with the NCQG is taking on a more prominent role in climate action, and obviously the other multilateral processes like the G20 that have been mentioned and others. And so I think that it's very important that we're having this discussion, and I think the need for advisory and scrutiny and something that brings coherence, within and outside the UNFCCC is needed, especially at that international level, given the role of international dimensions in shaping just transitions. So I think that it's really important, and wanted to build on just some of the comments about how this is done, and I agree. I don't see it as much in the adaptation space in terms of guiding and scrutinizing integration of just transition principles into adaptation, but I also don't think that it's necessarily happening to the extent that it should in a way that is optimal when it comes to mitigation. And so some of these other areas, G20, for example, South Africa is working on a G20 critical minerals framework, which is looking to build on the UN panel on critical energy transition minerals, but looking to expand in some ways towards the more whole of economy, whole of society approach. And doing that with reference to some of the decisions within the UNFCCC, but again, without necessarily guidance or sort of advice in how to take that forward. That's something that we're exploring, and it's not an easy task. Similarly, and I think also within that, I think it's a good example in some ways, but I also do know that the private sector has raised concerns around the process, and it's interesting to then learn from that and understand how it could be improved. I think similarly, within the other work related to just transitions within the G20, for example, realizing just transitions within the Environment, Climate and Sustainability Working Group technical paper, looking to build on the Brazilian G20 principles on just energy transitions, but there again wanting to expand the scope to whole of economy, whole of society, and again not seeing or to an extent having to explore how to do that in the absence of guidance, and so I think what we're experiencing is really the need for somebody, some institution to play that role in helping to bring that coherence and to shape and guide and so also when it comes to some of the initiatives in the private sector, I think that it would be very valuable to provide a framework against which the initiatives that are being implemented can assess themselves, and civil society and others can hold them to account. And so hopefully those provide some examples that maybe indicate the challenges experienced, but most importantly, I would hope build the case for the Just Transition Work Program to really play that coordination, advisory, and sort of scrutiny role to advance more consistency and particularly to avoid what sometimes happens, which is where you've got climate action that then undermines the ability of other countries to implement their own just transitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, South Africa. Do we have any more? No? We're finishing in 2 minutes. If there are some final thoughts, they are welcome now. Nothing from online? No? Okay, thank you all, and I think it was a great discussion. We got lots of examples, a lot of concepts, and we will wrap up this for the plenary session after we heard we hear the 3 groups. Okay, thank you very much for participating.
Good morning, colleagues, and apologies for the slight delay. Your colleagues in meeting room 4 had very many ideas and inputs around concrete outcomes, concrete and actionable outcomes for the Just Transition work program, so they had us a bit delayed, but I hope we will have an equally interesting and informative discussion here. So as you can see also projected on the screen, the question around this topic is very open and very broad. So what could be some concrete and actionable outcomes of the Just Transition work program in the context of adaptation and climate resilience? We've heard a framing presentation earlier today from the Secretariat with some food for thought extracted from the discussions that we've had in Baku last year, but also from what also some of the parties here in the room have shared with us through their submissions. So now the floor is open for you to tell us a bit more around your ideas and your views on what these concrete and actionable outcomes could be in the context specifically of adaptation and climate resilience. So the floor is open both here in the room, but also for our participants online. So please. It always takes a bit of courage to be the first one breaking the ice, especially when the question is so broad. Do we have any of our online participants asking for the floor? Yes, Anktat, please.
I can get us kicked off, although I can't promise that what I'll say will be coherent. First of all, I suppose I think it's important to think about what the added value of a multilateral space thinking about just transitions is. And the way we have understood this is, yes, there is a role for sharing learning and national, like learning from one another about national case studies, but ultimately some sort of way of not redefining just transition principles, which could be helpful to bring some harmonization to the many, many, many different sets that are out there to kind of create a party-driven sort of vision on that, but also to think about what does it mean for all countries to achieve their just transition simultaneously. Like how does one coordinate or think about that? And I suppose we have thought about in that way, what would it look like to have a coordination framework for just transitions, for countries to be able to have that nationally rooted just transition approach, but in a way that is considerate of the fact that there will be spillover effects and that there will be a need to consider and anticipate those spillover effects, that there will be unintended consequences outside of their borders. And so some way of thinking about just transition at that global context, that to us is the added value of a multilateral discussion on or process on just transition. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Anktat. Now over to and I will not attempt the acronym, but the United Nations Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Yes, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights would like to second the interventions of other colleagues in rooms talking about the principles that can apply the Just Transition Work Program. I would like to just mention a few of them for your consideration. One would be human rights, intersectional and gender-based approaches. The other one, fair and equitable benefit sharing. Principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities. respect, promotion, and protection of indigenous peoples' rights, including the right to free, prior, and informed consent. And also this point that was raised yesterday during the World Cafe, which was about intergenerational approaches, so that current just transition measures are also thought in terms of future generations and the responsibility that we have for them, or to them. Lastly, the principles of do not harm and precautionary as well. And lastly, the office would like to highlight the importance of incorporating social and environmental safeguards. This could look like as, for example, wide public participatory mechanisms, including, as I mentioned, free, prior, and informed consent, but also other active participatory mechanisms for making communities and the beneficiaries as part of the co-design and co-owners of just transition processes related to adaptation. The other one would be to incorporate grievance and redress procedures for unintended or intended harms caused by just transition policies, environmental and human rights due diligence in the context of the private sector, and human rights and environmental impact assessments, as well as transparency requirements and social protection guarantees.
Thank you very much. Next, I have the Women and Gender constituency. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. When we are talking about actionable outcomes, I think that we need to be talking about what is going to be the enabler of everything that we have been discussing here. Because we have been discussing about, yes, knowledge sharing, we have been discussing about international cooperation, we have been discussing about the principles, but where is this all going to land? Like, which is going to be the place where we're going to have that? And for that, as constituency, in conversation with parties, but as well listening and kind of recalling what was presented to us this morning at the end by the UNFCCC Secretariat, when we saw that parties in their submissions, but also in the different conversations, have been voicing the need of a sort of mechanism. And that is something that we would like as well to support, the need of a global just transition mechanism, an enabler for creating, not like having this knowledge sharing path for tools, best practices, but also a place where we can foster those just transition policies, international cooperation, and create a lot of synergies, right? Because we have been speaking about how we are not going to duplicate efforts, how the transition is not just an energy transition, which means that our colleague from South Africa was bringing how agriculture is so important. So that are not perhaps these actors within the UNFCCC, so how and where can we start bringing people together to start identify, okay, what is actually one of the directions that we can have, and then think about ways in which we can bring that into more a national context. So with that said, and also what our colleague from UNCTAD was saying, what do we mean by just transition? How can we have as well that global understanding of that, so that the just transition in one place is not creating harm in another? But that cannot be possible, or that cannot happen if we refrain the Just Transition work program to dialogues. We need something further, and listening as well our comrades from Burkina Faso, from Ghana, and others. A global Just Transition mechanism is as well a pathway to start being a little bit more creative and responding to the urgency that we have for the implementation phase, in which the COP30 presidency has been calling us to start acting upon. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I see no other requests for the floor here in the room. I see Costa Rica. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Thank you. Quite easy. It's just to support that what the lady just said. We've been talking about, I don't know, a day or so, And it's clear that we have a lack of a mechanism that could make a bigger group, and that's really an understanding needing for all of our countries. So from the Costa Rican perspective, we support that claim. Okay.
Thank you, Costa Rica. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I think this work program can and should deliver tangible outcomes that connect global ambition with meaningful on-the-ground change, especially for vulnerable communities when it comes to the context of adaptation and climate resilience. And just to speak to one opportunity involving embedding just transition in national adaptation plans, and we can draw out lessons learned from our dialogue in June last year on that issue. I guess for Australia, when we're developing our first national adaptation plan, it's something that's grounded in science, it has inclusive consultation, and just transition principles are front and centre. And this includes, of course, listening to Indigenous communities and ensuring adaptation measures respect culture, drive resilience, and deliver long-term development. These efforts also don't stop at our borders, and in our region we're supporting our Pacific partners with Pacific-led transitions, including those that build local jobs and skills, and this is just transition in action and something that should be reflected. We also see value in identifying adaptation's contribution to education, health, and workforce resilience, and this can bring to surface what works, identify gaps, and strengthen accountability. And I think with the right information, we can ensure that no one's left behind in the transition and in terms of issues on adaptation. At the same time, it's really worth acknowledging that while there's a strong desire for progress on outcomes, and I share this desire, the impact lies not just in scale, but in clarity, and that means getting real value from this work program. And we all know in this process a single decision or a single paragraph or even a sentence can carry weight, and it can reverberate around the world. So some initiatives have proven more symbolic than substantive, and I'm sure we can all think of examples and instances where size hasn't equaled effectiveness. So at the same time, when we talk about just transition and adaptation, we can't see it as a substitute for emissions reductions, and so adaptation here needs to go hand in hand with those efforts. And just finally, when it comes to outcomes, this work program should be helping parties document and share best practices so that we can build a community of practice that's fair, it's focused, and it's future ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. Next on my list, I have Malawi and then EU. Malawi, you have the floor.
Thank you. Actionable outcomes under the Just Transition Work Programme must be grounded in a recognition of LDC realities and that their just transition pathways look a lot different than more advanced economies. So because of limited resources, competing priorities, rising poverty and development challenges, this makes just transition to sustainable climate resilient economies even more critical for LDCs, and only through intentional alignment, inclusive processes, and tailored support can the work program serve as a mechanism for those most in need. So in practice for LDCs, this means support the assessment of LDC just transition needs and priorities through adaptable and relevant tools such as a needs assessment mechanism or case studies and exercise. So conducting needs assessments tailored to each country's national context to identify where the transitions are required is critical for us. And this means also identifying sectors likely to be affected and clarifying each country's priorities and where the actions are needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Malawi. Next, the European Union. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, we ended up COP29 without a decision, as everybody knows here, and that's something we deeply regret. And I think there's still well, we then haven't exhausted what we could do with the current setup of this work program. There is a lot of content that has been shared in the dialogues in 2024. Now, in this dialogue, there will be another one on the energy sector later this year. And we believe that in that sense, like the outcome that we would like to see this year is having a good decision, a consensual decision containing high-level political messages on the importance of considering just transition aspects in the transition, not only to climate neutral societies, but also climate resilient societies, things we have been discussing for the last year and a half. And then we would also like to see some more specific operational messages and findings coming out of the dialogues that can give direction to parties and non-party stakeholders, including the private sector, to design and implement their climate policies, plans, strategies, and action towards climate neutral, resilient society in a just and inclusive manner, and in alignment with GST outcomes and 1.5 pathways. So like previous dialogue and this dialogue have already led to the exchange of many best practices. From the summary reports of this constructive discussion, we could derive more operational kind of messages, findings, and we can discuss how to take out this recommendation that supports parties in the elaboration and updating and implementation of NDC NAPs and LTLETs, as well as non-party stakeholders, as I said. So an outcome like a decision which sets high-level political messages and more operational messages is an outcome that we would like to see and that we haven't had yet, unfortunately.
Thank you, EU. Next on my list, I have Bingo. Thank you. Bingo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm Agnes Lindblad from Bingo, representing the United States Council for International Business. Where do we start? I would want to say first that it is critical to be mindful of mandates and also, like we discussed in the session prior, already existing work. So, for example, of course, the ILO already has very mature work streams and efforts on just transition. So just really, really want to caution against duplicating work and just using up unnecessary resources, quite frankly. And also want to echo some of the really brilliant and rich discussions that we had yesterday in our group, calling on leveraging existing work, right, under the UNFCCC. We heard references to the Adaptation Committee. I myself brought up the technical work being carried out by the KCI, all of which are serving as brilliant assets and resources for considerations on adaptation angles of just transition, but also to aid in that implementation. I also just, again, want to remind ourselves of how NAPs and NDCs could be leveraged where suitable as existing vehicles for implementation and considerations of just transition. In that way, we'll certainly also respect the nationally driven nature of implementation, and also, again, emphasizing how critical it is for specifically just transition to really be localized and nationally adapted and determined. So in terms of outcomes, I think some of those suggestions that we saw during the icebreaker presentation today could really be helpful to guide the work of the Just Transition Work Program. Especially considering a repository of real-world just transition case studies. And that would then also serve as an avenue to inspire and help aid
national implementation. And of course, a critical point there is for this repository to be open to both parties and stakeholders. And of course, the private sector there would have a lot of very concrete examples to provide. As a final thought, I just want to say as well that we should be mindful of the work that is currently being undertaken under the agenda item for AIM, Arrangements for Intergovernmental Meetings, where parties and SB chairs have expressed concern over the ever-evolving expansion of the UNFCCC process and really just looking at how to better streamline agendas and streamline overall the UNFCCC process and being mindful about creating new overly arduous processes just for the sake of adding processes. So just really want to be mindful of how we can leverage already existing avenues and making real implementation possible. Yeah, I'll stop there, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next on my list, I have C40. Please, you have the floor.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, Jasmine Burgess from C40, but speaking on behalf of the local government and municipalities constituency. Yeah, just echoing a lot of the comments that have just been made as well, and very much on the avoidance of duplication, and but also the very well taken point that even the smallest words can have a very large impact, and we from the local government constituency, for us, I think one of the things we've spent a lot of time here and other places talking about just transition, but often we talk about the policies and the processes, but we tend to lose a bit the fact that we're talking about people's livelihoods and how people and residents are affected. And for us, we have a very clear ask, which is that it's extremely helpful for this program to recognize the role of subnational governments in being able to deliver a just transition. We had a great example about the role of Scotland and the work that was being done in the previous session. We have a number of examples of cities in all across different regions that are doing local just transition processes because the residents are demanding for some element of leadership and something to happen at the local level on this. And I think that's important. In the group that I was facilitating yesterday, one of the colleagues was mentioning how they really struggled with consultation on a climate action plan and how to ensure that you can do good consultation. A very clear response to us is activate your subnational governments because they are able to support local consultation and local engagement with populations and understands the needs and the context. So I'm a broken record on this, but I think it's a very useful thing that this program can send a strong signal about multi-level governance on a just transition, because I think that's how parties can help make it happen and how we can do this all collaboratively, and also goes back to the point about how you help the people that need to be helped in a just transition. So just a couple of other things I would just say is that I think the discussions yesterday were very rich in terms of some of the policy issues that relate to adaptation and just transition a bit. We have not touched so much on this today, but some of the points around the issues of skilling and how that relates to adaptation and resilience, some of the points around social protection, but also, one of the things that has come up that we're seeing at the local level is around issues such as the gaps in green skills for green industries to make progress, but then also the growing migration that's happening and how you can think about those two issues together, because it's actually a very close interrelationship. So all of this to say there is something in the point about having a repository of case studies, having some elements of these, of what is this adaptation and just transition overlap, because I think there are others outside of this room and in this that are desperate for this. It's not just about us. I talk to colleagues who work on adaptation who look for guidance on how they can be more aligned with the work that some of us are doing more specifically on just transition. So we just really echo that call. And then lastly, I just wanted to just sort of echo the points that were made by others about this has been, the work program is very valuable in the way that we've been able to discuss these issues, but having some concrete outcome is important, and whether that is, I heard there were some calls about a mechanism and there have been others about more specific guidance, but I think we need to start to coalesce around that, otherwise there's also the missed opportunity of what's happening at the local level to be able to activate that can link to this. Thank you.
Thank you, LGMA. Now, next on my list, I have South Africa. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And I think from our perspective, I think it's important to, one, recognize the elements within the decision. And I think the call towards concrete outcomes, yes, we can appreciate the discussions that we are having within the dialogues, which are rich, and the outputs that are coming out of the dialogues are rich. But I think there is a need to take it a step further and look at ways in which we can explore concrete outcomes that are able to operationalize the dimensions within the dialogues we are discussing. And I think part of the reason, which I agree with my colleague, that it was unfortunate that we were not able to reach a decision at COP29. But I think part of the reason, or what the focus needs to be, is then how do we take it a step further in terms of operationalizing and ensuring that what we come out with from these discussions will translate into a decision useful text. And in there, we've had some practical examples, which are very interesting proposals from different parties, which I think are worth exploring and taking a step further, which reflect concrete outcomes. So beyond just the dialogues and having discussions and a summary of discussions, how do we have these discussions translate into something tangible? And I think in that aspect, the proposals around establishing, for example, a just transition facilitative committee, and in there, discussions also around establishing a guidance framework. In there, we are able to sort of, in a real and practical way, foster a coherence around the just transition work and identify areas where we can amplify and synergize. And we can do this without duplicating, for example. But I think the bottom line would be then, what is the value proposition of this work program in driving that area of work forward? So there are definitely areas, proposals on the table that we could develop further, evolve even further, that speak to tangible, practical outcomes. And the point is to deliver the value proposition of this work program beyond just having dialogues, but translating into actual tangible efforts that are able to not only facilitate integrating fairness and justice in the work that we do around the transition pathways, but to ensure that we send signals that translate into meaningful outcomes beyond the UNFCCC. Thanks.
Thank you, South Africa. Next on my list, I have Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, please.
So to look for concrete and actionable outcomes in the Just Transition work program in the context of adaptation and climate resilience, it should focus on enabling and supporting parties in advancing their nationally determined Just Transition pathways as it relates to adaptation action, rather than defining universal models or prospective outcomes. The Just Transition work program can add real value by serving as a platform for sharing experiences, challenges, and lessons learned from different national contexts. To support enablement, the Just Transition work program discussions can serve as a space to identify current barriers for developing countries to achieve their just transitions and adaptations as it relates to implementation and access to finance, capacity building, and technology. Exchange between countries as it relates to social and economic dimensions related to just transitions in their national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions, ensuring alignment between adaptation efforts and social protection needs. Thank you, Secretariat.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Next, I see Antigua and Barbuda. Antigua and Barbuda, you have the floor.
Thank you. Antigua and Barbuda deeply appreciates this crucial dialogue. We concur with colleagues that this is about understanding how dialoguing, conversations, and these principles translates into action that benefits all, particularly those of us who are the most vulnerable and that are on the front lines of climate change. for us as a SIDS, particularly in the and not an afterthought in the conversations. We hope that mechanisms which facilitate and enhance access to finance for locally led adaptation initiatives, as well as targeted capacity building and technology transfer programs for adaptation and resilience that equips our workforces and which facilitates international cooperation towards that are the type of outcomes that we can move towards. Thank you.
Thank you, Antigua and Barbuda. I recognize the Dominican Republic. Please, you have the floor.
From our perspective, some concrete and actionable outcomes of the GT Just Transition Work Program in the context of adaptation and resilience could include, beside technical guidance on how to integrate just transition in national adaptation plans and NDCs, a monitoring mechanism for social impacts of adaptation policies, mobilization of target climate finance for just transition with a resilient focus, and finally, we really think that it's important to create a knowledge-sharing platform for developing countries with particular attention to the needs of SIDS countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further requests from the floor in the room. Just to reiterate the invitation also for our colleagues online. If there are no further requests from the floor, we can close this breakout group. You have gained 5 more minutes of coffee break, so congratulations to you. You will come back here after the coffee break, and we will let you to the next topic at 11:15. So please be back in this room at 11:15, and I'll see you all at 11:25. So quite a coffee break compared to the rushed ones we've had over the course of yesterday. So please enjoy it, and I'll see you all back in plenary. Thank you very much for the very rich discussion we had here. Thank you.
few housekeeping. One is when you take the floor, please do state your name and the capacity in which you speak, because that will help us to not only accurately capture the content of your intervention, but also attribute the interventions correctly. Secondly, I appreciate if you could keep the interventions clear and concise, so that would provide an opportunity for all of those who wanted to take the floor, given our limited time. And we would also appreciate if you could speak slowly and clearly. That helps us to make sure that we capture the content accurately, and also helps those who are joining remotely. For our colleagues who are joining remotely, please do use the raise hand function. My colleague will monitor the platform and let me know if there are flags online, and we will come to you accordingly. So with that, without further ado, the floor is open.
Thank you. It's kind of funny to start today with the linkages outside the UNFCCC and the concrete outcomes, and then circle back to the work streams under the UNFCCC process. But it might be worth, starting with COP27. When this was created under the CMA, it was an entirely new space. There was no real guidance under the Paris Agreement, like there are for many other items, and it was kind of scattered around different agenda items. And I think this work program in particular now offers a critical platform to unify and elevate the role of just transition, including in relation to adaptation, while maintaining alignment with the Paris Agreement goals and supporting resilience. In terms of specifics, this work program can strengthen coherence around the relevant work streams. And I think in particular the NAPs and NDCs and existing frameworks we can use, and it's critical that when we do, we avoid duplication, as we mentioned in the last session, and identify the value out of this work program, which might include streamlining of transparency and reporting, sharing lessons across thematic areas, or aligning guidance that embeds social and economic considerations alongside issues of resilience. And we heard yesterday and from the presenters today the importance of adaptation that's science-based, locally led, nationally backed, and focused on lasting resilience. And we've seen how effective adaptation can lead to benefits for jobs, education, well-being, many of these just transition elements. And this can help guide investment and implementation. We've had a range of dialogues and discussions, and we shouldn't lose this content. It's also essential that we see how just transition can remain firmly grounded in the climate architecture. And we can see recent UNFCCC decisions across the GST, the GGA, and decisions on guidance to the GCF and GEF, reinforcing the importance of transitions that are just, people-centred, culturally respectful, and future-focused. So we don't have a lot of time left. Of course, there was no decision last year, and we've got COP30 this year, and then next year 31. So let's not lose sight of the work program and its potential to leverage our work so far and enhance some of these synergies, while not shifting attention away from just transition and climate goals more generally, because this is how we ensure that they're met fairly and effectively.
Thank you, Australia. Do we have anyone online? Okay. That is European Union.
Yes, thank you. So when we are considering these synergies, we think that we shouldn't forget, first, the goal of this work program, which is to increase ambition and accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And in that sense, the work just transition-related consideration that can increase, accelerate this implementation. And there are many, there are many rooms, bodies and processes where we could do so. I'm not going to cite all of them because it's there are lots. But I'm going to mention in this context of adaptation and like the work that is going on currently in these work streams is like, for example, the updated NAP technical guidelines mention the importance of integrating just transition approaches into NAPs, and we already had also some discussions around this topic in the first dialogue in 2024. And what they mention is like involve addressing the needs of vulnerable population, creating and maintaining jobs, fostering a social dialogue to manage the socio-economic impacts of climate change, and so they also mention like meaningful participation of vulnerable and marginal groups. So it's really things that we have been discussing in this dialogue too. So we should look at how, it's mainstream, and then the language we use across these different rooms is coherent, and make sure that they're complementary and not duplicating as well the processes. Is also under the global goal on adaptation. There are several targets with relevance to the just transition, and particularly those related to the inclusive planning approaches and social protection. And the UAE BELEM work program on indicator is currently developing indicator to support tracking progress on these targets. So that's where we could potentially see some synergies and contribution from the Just Transition Work Program.
Thank you, EU, for the intervention. Women and the gender constituency, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. I think I will make 2 points, reinforcing as well from conversations of yesterday, where we talk about technology and how then we can also leverage from the work that the technology mechanism has been doing, and that as well means, for example, the CTCN. And when we talk about the CTCN, they have as well been doing a lot of work in bringing best practices, technology examples from grassroots organization. They have as well been having, and particularly I know because we have been following their work, they have in their advisory board the seats for the gender, for indigenous peoples, and for youth. So they already kind of have been advancing in bringing different perspectives, plus parties' perspectives, and as well they have these national determined entities, if I'm not mistaken, the abbreviation, the NDEs, which are also linking this technology work on the ground. So that is an arm where we can leverage a lot from. And in parallel, I would stress what other colleagues have been saying, and it's okay, how can we start using the language and also like the different activities that is happening in other different items. And for that, I would like to bring the Lima Work Program on Gender and its Gender Action Plan. The Gender Action Plan has defined 5 priority areas where we see coherence, means of implementation. We have been discussing about indicators, among many others, and what this program does is how can we transversalize gender in the different aspects, and how does it plays as well a role for just transitions, and how then, let's not duplicate, but let's like strengthen, as well other processes that can serve that just transition, that can bring an intersectional perception of how just transition work for everyone, as well as bringing different aspects for collective human rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you, women and gender constituency. Saudi Arabia, you have your floor.
Hi, I'm Abdurrahman Al-Mutairi, presenting Saudi Arabia. To answer the question, the Just Transition Work Program can maximize synergies with relevant UNFCCC work streams on adaptation and climate resilience by emphasizing the national context of just transitions. It should serve as a space that enables each party to identify and pursue its own nationally determined transition pathways without top-down measures, including as it relates to adaptation resilience. The Just Transition Work Program should be anchored in a bottom-up approach, allowing countries to define what just transition means in their specific socioeconomic development, environmental, and climate context. This would naturally complement ongoing work under adaptation and resilience, including the Global Goal on Adaptation and National Adaptation Plans. Also, to avoid any duplication when addressing adaptation in the Just Transition Work Program, should avoid discussions on mitigation elements to ensure focus on the adaptation aspect. And lastly, in sum, the Just Transition Work Program added value lies in creating space for parties to share experiences, needs, and priorities related to just transitions in the context of adaptation and resilience, without creating any prescriptive outcomes or overlapping with existing processes. Thank you so much, Secretary.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. Colleagues, given the three questions today, the similarity, we heard in the other room that some of the examples they've already sort of articulated, so it may appear repetitive, but we do encourage you all to still take the floor to share in the context of synergies under the UNFCCC process so that we can report back those. I see EU, you have the floor.
Yes, thanks. Then I can go through my exhaustive list. No, I'm not going to do that, but just thank you. I think the Women and Gender constituency also identified something that we would like to see as synergies with the enhanced extended enhanced Lima work program and its gender action plan. So not very much agree with that. There's also been some good work done on the just transition of the workforce and economic diversification under the Katowice Committee of Experts on the impacts of the implementation of response measures. And this technical work there should be synergies with that kind of technical work that has been done. We also believe that the Just Transition Work Program should maximize synergies with the follow-up on GST1, like the first global stock take, and provide technical input for the second global stock take, as well as increase synergies, actually link our work with the work program for urgently scaling up mitigation ambition and implementation. I believe we also heard the Women and Gender constituency mentioning the work under the technology mechanism. We talked about capacity building and technology as well yesterday, so we should see how there can be better synergies between these groups and very clearly as well, and we have had a session on this yesterday morning. There has been a lot of work done under the local communities and indigenous peoples platform. That is a resource hub that gathers many publications, and particularly also related to indigenous practices in adaptation. And so that could be some input for our work, and we could inversely provide input to that platform.
Thank you, European Union. Next, I have South Africa.
Thanks, Chair. I think we've sort of heard reflections over the past 2 days on not only the cross-cutting nature of just transition and how it sort of finds expression in different rooms. But I think more so today, we've had an appreciation of, for example, in examples that have been cited by parties in the room, the linkages that are there with the different work streams that exist within the UNFCCC. So it's clear it is a cross-cutting issue, and that the expectation is to mainstream it more broadly in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And I think in there lies a moment where how do we then address the question of ensuring coherence and ensuring that it is addressed in a manner that, one, that doesn't duplicate, but ensures that there is synergies and coherence, and that there is complementarity in how we address the issue in different rooms. So I think therein lies an opportunity, one, for the work program itself, the value proposition of the work program itself, is to do exactly that, to look at how equity and the just considerations then find expression across different rooms and how those are expressed. And for the topic that we are discussing at this dialogue, I think what was reflected this morning in the scene setting presentation around the work being done in GGA indicators, for example, for me, where a clear entry point could be looking at work that's being done in the GGA item under indicators, but looking at the socio-economic development indicators and seeing how that can help address equity within adaptation. I think there is a clear linkage. It doesn't duplicate the efforts that are being pursued within the GGA, but it then speaks to the scope and the mandate of this work program. And I think there are other examples that we could speak to. But I think it's important to not only elevate or speak to the essence of this work program and what it seeks to achieve, but the linkage is to consistently be around how do we reflect equity and how do we reflect the fairness considerations in what we do across the board. And I think my last point would be to also reference the need, in view of the cross-cutting nature of the issue, the need for some sort of institutional arrangement that can pull it all together. And I think there's been a lot of ideas around how we could, in an institutionalized way, pull all of this work together. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you very much, South Africa. Colleagues, so we still have about 5 minutes, so if there are any wanted to take the floor both in the room but also those joining virtually, please do so. Otherwise, we will wrap up soon and then we can return to the plenary. Thanks. Well, thank you very much. I know the third round is usually less interactive than the first two, and we had a really rich exchange throughout those 3 rounds. So we appreciate your active participation and look forward to seeing you in the plenary. And it's been a pleasure for us to support you in this round of discussion. So thanks so much. So we welcome you to join us there.